Hello, my name is Alwin Tong, and this is a podcast for Mozart's Child on December 13th. All rights reserved. The simple abstract of that idea, Mozart's Child, which was initially just a paper I wanted to write, but I think expresses itself more quickly and easily in terms of a podcast, is essentially that when we enroll our children into musical education with the idea that's most popularized by the Mozart effect of all the cerebral and intellectual benefits of studying music. My thesis is generally that those benefits for the method of education at present versus the way in which those composers that we generally acknowledge as models of paradigms of that musical intellectual tradition genius, there's a large separation between those two methods in which they learned and in which I think that classical musical education, as expressed in conservatories and even younger than that, and also post-secondary institutions, is not from the same tradition. Actually, that's my belief, at least. I would like to start off. So the title Mozart's Child essentially refers to how Mozart, my understanding would, how I would speculate on how he would have educated his child, and that musical tradition from which himself, Mozart, Beethoven, and Bach, and probably, and the majority of other musicians or composers up to an important time, 1830, were educated. So that's the abstract. A really quick thing. The idea of improvisation, I think, is the one example in my initial paper that kind of focuses, or that kind of points out what I call just the symptom of the difference and the alteration in musical pedagogy from that period to now. What I mean by that is that in the periods before 1830, 1829 actually is an important date for this kind of thing, because you have Felix Mendelssohn, the composer, on that date performed St. Matthew's Passion, and that in and of itself was kind of a first in our art musical tradition, in that it made everyone look backwards. It made everyone into what we perceive now as a classical musician, which is a person who looks backwards into time often and performs music of the past. Because up to that date, most music, Bach's time, Beethoven's time, Mozart's time included, was all about what you wanted next week, and maybe next month, and maybe next year. The new symphony, the new cantata every week, which Bach was essentially writing every week. It was the expected norm, and up until that date, that this idea of novelty was continually working itself forward. But after that date, we start looking backwards as a society in terms of what we value in terms of as musical art, and it really does mark a turning point. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but getting back to the idea of improvisation, the reason why I said it's a symptom of the change of thought or philosophy from the way that these composers started composing and to the way that we are educated now, is that if you look back at, I'm just going to use those three examples, but Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven, all three were very accomplished composers and improvisers, in addition to being performers. And if you look at anyone who graduates really essentially from a program these days, some kind of course in music, we don't have this. And what it really belies is kind of an understanding, an analogy that I like to use is that of language, because all the way through language and music, I mean, they seem to run in parallel. Really quick example is that, I mean, from birth, if you were born learning music, you have so much more fluency, native fluency in that language than someone that tries to pick it up later. But that analogy seems to run throughout music. In any case, the example I always like to use is that is an example of taking the words of a great writer such as Abraham Lincoln, something like the Gettysburg Address, and taking those words and putting them in, teaching a child to repeat those words. I mean, expressively, mind you. I mean, teaching them to articulate those words, but leaving it at that. I mean, this is essentially what classical music does, and this is why this model right now is that because we're giving a sublime composition, really, and we're putting it into the hands of someone who's very young. And when we do that, if we get them to reproduce kind of what we structure as the sound, as those ideas, as they were conceived initially, we get almost like a playback machine. We can understand what they're saying, but this isn't a guarantor of the comprehension that's required to understand the context in which a lot of this has been written, and B, to compose something of that caliber itself. And so it is possible, let's say, to take, I don't know, a 12-year-old child and to teach them the words verbatim of the Gettysburg's address. And we could probably even record it, and it would sound convincing. But and that, I think, for the majority of people, that would be enough. The 90% of people, if they could hear it and they heard that the conviction of tone and the conviction of understanding, then that would suffice for whatever reason. But I want to focus on that 10%, because what happens is that because this occurs, okay, at that level, what happens is you satisfy. So you make, this is fine, this is okay for you. Once, if you have a successful performance of, let's say, your speaking role as, reproducing these words, then nothing else is demanded more of you. And that really is what happens, or what has happened in the role of classical music. And when I say 1830 is an important date, is because what happens is, on 1830 also, you have a lot of things happening. You have the Industrial Revolution really kind of going full force, and part of that creates a new social class, really, the merchant class, or the middle class of society in Europe, in Western Europe. And what their new affluence can buy is a piano. And you also have the burgeoning publishing empire. And I'm going to get back to these again one more time a little bit later on. But going backwards, so with this idea of music as language, and also with this idea of being able to place language in another person's mouth and having them express that language, I want to go back a little bit, just again, to Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart, and to the way they were educated. Because what they started out doing was not just performing. They learned music as a full course of study, okay? And what that means is they learned it almost essentially organically, through, composition, through scales. The much